Lately, I've been thinking a lot about Star Wars. As in, more than I usually do. But recently, it's been less about the movies and more about what people think of the movies. See, I'm fascinated by the responses to The Last Jedi. The movie is a massive critical success, it's a massive commercial success, but among a sizable portion of the fans, it's divisive, in a way I haven't seen from a major blockbuster, maybe ever. Occasionally, I'll skim through social media, reading reactions from people who hated it, and there's a line that I've encountered countless times. It's an okay movie, but a bad Star Wars movie. Every time I see this, I wonder, what does that even mean? What makes a good Star Wars movie? And more importantly, what do we want from a Star Wars movie? So I decided to figure it out. I put on my Skywalker Ranch hat to prove that, yeah, I went there once, and ventured outside to get to the bottom of this. Before we get started, quick disclaimer, I'm going to try to keep this as objective as possible, but it's Star Wars and I have opinions on Star Wars that are bound to crop up in some way, so really quickly, here's my take on every movie. A New Hope and Empire are masterpieces, Return of the Jedi is good, the prequels are not good, but Phantom Menace is the most watchable, Force Awakens is good, Rogue One is pretty good, Last Jedi is great. Here's my ranking, now let's get back on track. So when I ask, what do we want from a Star Wars movie, you might just think,
the same thing we want from any movie, you dummy. For it to be good.
But Star Wars is more complicated than that. I think it's accurate to say Star Wars is the biggest American cultural phenomenon since football. There's lots of big movie franchises, but none quite like this. Of the 10 highest grossing film series, Star Wars is the only one that's not an adaptation. It's not based on novels or comic books, which means there's no safety net of source material. What do I mean by that? Well, going into a Harry Potter movie, most people already know the story from the books. Or with the Marvel movie, even if it's not based on one specific comic, it's usually an amalgam of a few different storylines, plus you know who's not going to die because they're already appearing in trailers for movies coming out the following year. But Star Wars is the only major film series where the primary story developments happen exclusively in the movies. When audiences go into a new Star Wars movie, they don't know what's going to happen. It's an entirely different experience than just about every other modern blockbuster. And while other series have been rebooted and remade, Star Wars has been one ongoing story that has continued for 40 years and counting. There is simply no other film series that works this way. We live in a strange time where Star Wars is omnipresent. New Star Wars material is available in books, comics, TV shows, video games, and Disney plans to release a new Star Wars movie every year until long after we're all dead. But it wasn't always like this.
A long, long time ago, in a galaxy far away.
Back in 1977, things were much different. There was no canon, no episodes, no Wikipedia. There was just a movie called
Star Wars, 1 billion years in the making, and it's coming to your galaxy this summer.
That married the most astounding spectacle ever put on screen with a classic story, both mythic and relatable, and it became the most successful movie of all time. 3 years later, there was a sequel, and back then, what did people want from a new Star Wars movie? Pretty much just more Star Wars. And while The Empire Strikes Back is in many ways a truly strange sequel, we'll get into that more later, it gave them that. It had the cool, fun surface elements of the first one and built on the story in surprising ways. And another 3 years later, what did people want from seemingly the last Star Wars movie? More Star Wars, plus an ending. And they got it. Everyone liked Star Wars, everyone got what they wanted, and everyone was happy. And then we entered the strangest, arguably most important time in Star Wars history. After 1983, it seemed like Star Wars was over. It was complete. And for generations of audiences, including mine, we experienced it simply as this. We consumed Star Wars with no hype, no anticipation, and no expectations. The movies simply were.
Collect the complete Star Wars trilogy one by one in their attractive new packages or in this collectible gift pack.
We were like devout Christians, and this was our Bible. We watched them over and over and over, studying them, memorizing them, discussing them. And then in 1991, what became known as the Star Wars Expanded Universe began. Countless novels and comic books and video games filling in every gap in the story of the original trilogy, telling stories from earlier in the timeline and continuing the story after Return of the Jedi. Soon, there was not a moment in the saga unexplored, no character whose backstory could not easily be looked up. Official Star Wars guides and encyclopedias were published. For over 20 years, fans were taught that they could learn and know everything about Star Wars. They were given a canonical version of events that happened after the original movies ended, and they accepted it. The expanded universe taught fans that there were answers to every question, that the backstory to everything will surely be explained somewhere. They could learn all the rules. They could know everything about Star Wars. In 1997, my generation finally got to experience something we'd wanted for as long as we could remember: the Star Wars trilogy on the big screen.
Now, for its 20th anniversary, the adventure of a lifetime returns to the big screen.
The original movies were re-released into theaters as the Star Wars Special Edition. But they weren't exactly the original movies. As we all know, George Lucas made some alterations. Some were small, like cleaning up old matte paintings, but others were bigger, changes that impacted characterization, that fundamentally changed scenes. We pretty much all agree that these changes were a mistake, but this moment marked a shift in Star Wars fandom. For the first time, the fans knew better than the creator. They said, "No, George Lucas, Han shot first. Luke didn't scream as he fell, and Cy Snoodles was better off staying in the background." Okay, we gotta talk about the prequels. And yeah, these movies have a lot of problems, but we're not gonna talk about those. We're gonna talk about the two things here that are important. One, they were all backstory. They gave us origins for the major characters from the original movies, as well as the minor ones. They gave us more backstory than anyone actually asked for. Two, they didn't feel the same. The originals were scrappy. They were about relatable protagonists who were mostly regular people who came from humble beginnings. The world felt lived in and tactile. And the prequels abandoned all of that. They were stiff and formal. The characters were all royalty, politicians, and monks, who spoke stilted, vaguely medieval-sounding dialogue in varying degrees of British accents.
I will take back what's ours.
Sorry, milady.
The world was clean and artificial, and quite often was obviously created in a computer. While there still existed surface elements like lightsabers, spaceships, and alien planets, the relatable, tactile feeling that made the originals feel special was totally gone. I should underline that a few times. The feeling was gone. We're gonna come back to that. Because what people wanted from these movies was more Star Wars. And what they got contained elements of Star Wars, but it didn't feel like the Star Wars they remembered. Okay, we're almost caught up to the present. This is the final part of the story. So, in 2012, Disney bought Lucasfilm and announced they were going to make new movies continuing the story after Return of the Jedi. So, episodes 7, 8, and 9, but you already know that. For the first time in 32 years, the story of Luke Skywalker, Leia Organa, and Han Solo would be continuing. And not in the expanded universe, since that was all scrapped from canon, in a new movie. For Kathleen Kennedy and the Lucasfilm team and J.J. Abrams, director of Episode 7, there was one major goal: make it like it used to be, and more importantly, make Star Wars feel like it used to. On every level, The Force Awakens was designed to give viewers the Star Wars experience they hadn't had since the original trilogy. All those changes in style and approach in the prequel trilogy, they were reversed. The characters once again talked like normal people. The protagonists were relatable. They came from humble beginnings. The movie was shot on 35mm film. It used real sets and practical effects. The art direction was dirty and lived in. It was once again relatable and tactile. It felt like Star Wars again. The movie wanted so much to give viewers the feeling they'd missed that it largely based its structure around the original film. While it featured new characters unlike those we'd encountered before, the story beats and visuals were all familiar. It was designed to reassure us and win us all back by being just like the Star Wars we remembered. Disney's new one-a-year plan for Star Wars goes like this. One year we'll get a new episode in the main saga, then the next year we'll get a spin-off, another story taking place within the world of Star Wars, and they'll alternate like that. Now, for all the faults of the prequels, they were always designed as key components in the main saga, but the spin-offs, like Rogue One and the upcoming Solo, aren't. They're basically Wikipedia articles in movie form. Rogue One is a 2-hour film designed to answer a decades-long nitpick, or plot hole as some call it, about the design flaw on the Death Star. And Solo will answer questions like, how did Han Solo get the Millennium Falcon? How did he meet Chewbacca? And presumably, what is the Kessel Run? And then, of course, there's The Last Jedi, which has only been out for a couple months, and I'm sure you have your own opinion on it. This is where things get interesting. While, to me at least, it still very much feels like a classic Star Wars movie, it doesn't play things as safe as The Force Awakens Awakens. Instead of repeating familiar story beats and continuing a familiar status quo, it pushes the story forward into new, unexpected territory. So now that we've caught up to the present, it's time for... Okay, I've gone through 40 years of history, obsessed over the evolution of Star Wars fandom. So what was the point of all that? Where am I even going with this? The new Star Wars movies have been the biggest movies of each of the past 3 years. They've each received an A cinema score, meaning general audiences really liked them, and the vast majority of film critics have given them positive reviews. But the response from the most passionate set of fans has been extremely mixed. And I don't think this is as simple as hardcore Star Wars fans being more demanding. I think over the past 30 years, several factors added up to change the way Star Wars fandom works. First, the canonization of the original trilogy turned the stories into a rigid set of rules. Then the expanded universe created an expectation of backstory, plus it gave fans a timeline of events they would later be told to disregard. The special editions and prequels created the mindset that the fans knew better than the creators. And of course, there was the huge gap of time between episodes 6 and 7, during which fans formed expectations for what they wanted to see. Over several decades, Star Wars fans became Star Wars experts. Fandom became an achievement built on an accumulation of trivia. And these movies they waited their whole lives for were expected to be a reward. Something they had earned. When we were younger and watching the original movies for the first time, our priority with each successive film was just to find out what happened next. But now, a lot of fans are going into a new Star Wars movie with a checklist, a list of demands, questions they want answered, scenes they want to see, and a strict set of rules the movie must adhere to based on a dogmatic interpretation of the original films. So most of the fan complaints about The Last Jedi are the points where the movie does not connect to the trivia they've learned. So they don't like new force powers that we haven't seen before. They don't like the speed at which Rey's skills grow because it's not exactly how it happened for Luke. They don't like Leia using the Force because that's not what she did 30 years ago. They don't like Snoke's lack of backstory because it doesn't give them the explanations they want. They don't like Luke's characterization because that's not where he was last time we saw him. And they really don't like the Finn and Rose subplot because it's about new characters in a new setting, so it doesn't connect to the lore of the original movies in any way. What it seems like these fans want isn't a story, it's a Wikipedia article. They want plot, information, and payoffs to reward their accumulation of trivia. They want Snoke to be Darth Plagueis so they can feel good about knowing who Darth Plagueis is. I have a theory that the Rosetta Stone for this whole thing, the key to what many fans want from a new Star Wars movie, is this. The Darth Vader scene from the end of Rogue One. If you do what I did and search through comments on Twitter or YouTube from people who aren't fans of The Last Jedi, this scene gets brought up the most as the high point of the new movies. And you'll see people saying things like, they should have given us the Luke equivalent of the Darth Vader hallway scene. But while a fun moment, it's essentially empty. It doesn't add anything to the story or character. It's like an HD remake of a PlayStation 1 game. That thing you already like, doing what you expect, but shinier. While the original trilogy is so often treated as the perfect standard to which all new Star Wars must be held, they share so many of the things people complain about in the new movies. Luke goes from a farm boy who's never left his home to a Force-using X-Wing pilot who blows up the Death Star in about a day. And why was Obi-Wan Kenobi the rebellion's only hope? Leia had never even met him. What did she expect him to do? The Empire Strikes Back barely advances the overall story of the series. Most of it is spent with characters either running away or hanging out on a swamp. They hype up a legendary Jedi warrior who turns out to be a silly Muppet who steals food. Han and Leia seem to be on the run for a couple days, while Luke appears to be training for weeks. New Force abilities just appear through all the movies without us ever seeing the characters learning them. The first 40 minutes of Return of the Jedi have zero impact on the story or characters beyond just getting Han back. For the final battle of the entire war, a lot of time is spent on wacky hijinks with Ewoks. The revelation that Leia is Luke's sister was clearly a late addition to the story, and she's given no closure with her father, let alone a single scene, which really lets down the promise of there is another. Also, they couldn't think of anything more original than just another Death Star. And by the way, there is a lot of silly comedy through all these movies.
Well, at least you're still in one piece. Look what happened to me.
Last week, Pablo Hidalgo from the Lucasfilm Story Group posted this tweet. I often think about how lucky we all were, that the best stuff came out when we were the most impressionable. And honestly, I could have just made this video a 15-minute screenshot of that tweet, because it kind of says it all. So the fans who hate The Last Jedi, who say it's a bad Star Wars movie, that it ruins the series, I'm not saying they're watching movies wrong. There's no wrong way to watch a movie. Well, okay, you could watch it while texting the theater, that's wrong. But it's not that these people are watching movies wrong, it's that in these movies, they're looking for something they can't get. They want Star Wars to give them the experience of being 8 years old, sitting on their living room couch and wearing out their VHS tapes of the original movies. For many people, Star Wars is less a movie than a feeling that new movies, seen as an adult, can't possibly recreate. Unless you get a time machine and go forward to the year 2020 or later and buy the new trilogy on Blu-ray, then transfer the movies over to VHS tapes, then hop back in the time machine and travel back to the mid-90s or whenever you were a kid and give them to yourself. Strip away the anticipation and expectations and the need for backstory and rules until they're not new Star Wars movies, they're just Star Wars. Now, most of what I've been talking about really just applies to a certain section of Star Wars fans, and just because they've learned the most trivia about the lore doesn't make their opinions more valid or more important. Star Wars is maybe the most popular thing in the world, and it means so many different things to so many different people. To the kids who grew up with the prequels and Clone Wars cartoon, the recent converts won over by the new emphasis on strong female protagonists and diverse casting. The old people who have been around for this entire thing since it started in the 70s. And my group, maybe the biggest or at least the most vocal. The ones born between 1980 and 1992. The ones too young to see the original trilogy in theaters, who grew up with them on VHS. So what do we want from a Star Wars movie? I think that's a question worth asking ourselves. As vast as Star Wars is, as much trivia and lore as there is to learn about, the reason we all fell in love with it in the first place is the story. Star Wars is, above all else, a big, sprawling, ongoing story, and like it or not, that story is going to keep on going. And if it's going to be meaningful and continue to entertain new generations, it can't just feed us nostalgia. It can't just recycle elements from the movies we grew up with. It needs to surprise us, it needs to grow, to show us new sights and characters and stories we haven't seen before. Part of why I loved The Last Jedi was that it gave me what I wanted, but also what I didn't know I wanted. It took the elements that I liked but pushed the story forward into unexpected new territory, and it created countless possibilities for future new stories in this world. And I think that's the key. It's not that we're supposed to let the past die, it's that we need to accept that there's a future as well. A future with a hell of a lot of Star Wars in it. And it's going to be a lot of different things. We'll like some, we might not like some others, but every one of these movies is going to be somebody's favorite.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
So beautiful.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. This topic has been on my mind for like 6 months now, so it felt good to finally take some time and dig into it. Now, while you were watching this video, I'm sure there was one big question that was on your mind, which is, what kind of grooming products does he use? And you were in luck because this video is sponsored by Dollar Shave Club. They actually sent me this whole little starter kit here, which is very cool, but the truth is I already have this stuff because, like, no joke, I've been a member for the past 2 years. See, a lot of us human beings have to shave, and buying razors and blades kinda sucks. They're stupidly expensive. In the drugstore, they're stuck behind that locked plastic wall. The whole thing is a hassle, but Dollar Shave Club just sends them to you every month, and they're better and less expensive. And if you sign up now with this offer, which I recommend you do, for $5 you get this whole starter kit with stuff that's worth more than $5. You get the executive razor, which is the best one, a pack of cartridges, shave butter, body cleanser, wipes, and then after that, replacement cartridges are just a few bucks a month. So, to get this, go to dollarshaveclub.com/PHW. Those are my initials, and again, that is dollarshaveclub.com/PHW. Starter kit, just $5. I think you should do it, so go do it. So if you like these videos we're making and you want to help us make more of them, as well as launch this podcast that's going to be coming very soon, you should check out the Patreon and pledge whatever you want there. If you want to yell at me about stuff and get updates on the things that we're working on, follow me on all the social media links. I probably won't see you back here next Wednesday because I am leaving on a trip to Ireland and England. Just hang out there and have a fun time. And so I'll see you when I get back.